Hello and good evening, everyone. If you guys can just take your seats, I know we have overwhelming participation, so if you guys can sit anywhere, that'll be helpful. Uh, so it's so lovely to see you all here, and welcome to Nalsar Ivy, the 15th edition of the tournament. With 120 teams, this is the biggest Nalsar Ivy ever, and one of the biggest debating championships in the country. With that, we will be starting today's event, and it's so lovely to see you all here with your colorful pandas. I hope you would love the process and you will love the tournament. And this is Ashik, the tournament director of the event, along with my team, who is all busy in various corners of this place getting things fixed for you all. Please bear with us in case we're not able to respond something in time because all of us are running around getting one thing or the other. And to our wonderful cap here, who has helped us throughout the tournament, who are here. Uh, Banoon and Bia are here for a workshop on deconstructing speeches. Over to them and hope you all have a lovely tournament ahead.
Thank you, Ashik. And again, good afternoon to everyone. Again, my name is Bea. With me is Bunny. We are just two out of the five members of the Adjudication Corps for Nalsar IV 2025. One of the others just walked in the room. So let's all give each other a round of applause for being here, for being part of a very big tournament. Congratulations to Nalsar and their debating society for being able to string together such a wonderful tournament. I'm very excited to meet you all and meet the broader Indian debating community. Okay, so the inspiration behind the lecture deconstructing speeches is because when we were instructed to make this lecture, there were two asks. The first ask was to make it geared towards novices because we have quite a number of novice turnout from people who haven't debated much in the past or aren't well exposed to more advanced or intermediate forms of debating, and therefore might benefit a lot from more instructive material on how to, let's say, distinguish a contribution that contributes to your case versus a contribution that deconstructs or rebuts the case of their opponent, as an example. But number two, they also requested that we integrate more advanced material as well. So we created something that hopefully covers a wide net of skills that, regardless of what your speaking position is, what your debate background is, whether or not you debated BP or AP or you did moot court or whatever before, you would find something to learn from and something to apply for the upcoming preliminary rounds. I will do my best to speak slowly because I admit that there are some parts of the presentation that are not directly spelled out, meaning a lot of the notes, if ever you are taking notes, will come from what I am saying orally. But if ever you have any questions, I will provide space in between portions of the lecture to ask questions if you have any. And at the end of the presentation, you can also ask questions. And even after the presentation, you can always approach the CA members or whoever you deem fit to ask questions about the lecture or about debate in general, because that's what the community is all about. So let's begin with an overview of parts of a speech. There are many different parts of what makes up a debate speech, but if we were really to distill it to its bare necessities, it starts from the top, which is framing, which refers to many things, but broadly it refers to setup, packaging, a model, especially if, let's say, a debate is talking about a policy that's going to be implemented, like this house would ban zoos, this house would impose uniform requirement in schools or in tertiary education, those things that cover what the motion is going to look like, how it is going to be implemented, why is it relevant to be debated in the status quo. Those are things that are nested under framing. Secondly, we have responses or destructive material, and alternatively, many people call it negative material, which refers to contributions that aim to debunk or disprove claims coming from the opposing side. So if you're on government bench and you're going to a motion, this house would ban zoos, the constructive material on government would look like material that would explain why we need to continue to ban zoos, or, for example, material that deconstructs the arguments made by opposition. So, for example, if opposition in that motion says we need to continue to have zoos, we shouldn't ban zoos because it's an important way for animals that are often endangered in the wild to be able to give in proper shelter, proper food, proper care by people that are working in the zoos. Deconstructive or negative material would look like, as someone on government, I would say this is not true because often a lot of zoos are actually very abusive. Often a lot of these animals do need to reign free, need to be free range, and therefore cannot be caged within a zoo. So that's an example of responsive or destructive material. The flip side of that is argumentative or constructive material, which is what most of you associate debating to be about. It is about crafting arguments, answering the question, why should the policy pass? Why should the policy fail? Why is something true? So going back to the example of this house would ban zoos, if I were government and I was trying to make positive material, I would say that we need to ban zoos because zoos tend to be very abusive towards animals. It's not a good environment for animals to live in. There are many animals that grow of old age much faster than their life expectancy expects them to grow, precisely because they are living in unfavorable conditions. So the way the presentation is structured is that each part will be discussed. So we'll discuss framing first, then responses, then argument, and constructive. First, what do you think framing is? Because when I was younger and I was new to debate back in 2016, I assumed that framing had anything to do with making up a policy. I thought that framing exclusively existed at the start of your speech. And the moment your introduction ends and you go into response or you go into argumentation, framing ends there. But in reality, framing exists at any part of the speech. It can be integrated into your response, it can be integrated into your argument, and it could constitute many things that have to do with illustrating the way the world works and how it works in relation to the motion. So as you can see here, it looks like number one, context setting. Facts about the world related to the motion that sets up the case and proves it to be true or proves it to be relevant. It looks like a model or a policy. So this is more popular or more commonplace for motions that imply that we have to implement a project. So this house would motions, or this house would impose a tax on sugar, for example, or this house would allow students to bring gadgets to school. Implementations of how that policy or how that ban would be implemented, that could also constitute framing. It could also look like general illustrations for different ways emotion can manifest in the status quo. And I'll give like a somewhat of a Venn diagram type of illustration to demonstrate what I mean. But the fourth thing that I think is underrated in framing is the concept of packaging. So it's context setting, meaning it's still technically facts about the world, but it's utilizing, let me hide this. It's utilizing more contestable facts or persuasion. So for example, in a motion, this house would ban school uniforms. Context setting could look like stating something factual, which is that some schools follow religious or cultural customs within which include clothing, but packaging takes that fact or takes things that are facts and instead transform them into things that are more contestable. So while it is a fact that there are some schools that require a certain type of way to dress because of religious or cultural or discipline and decorum considerations, packaging would look like the imposition of school uniforms has been unequally imposed across students. So maybe it's unfairly imposed on women to ensure that they show less skin, to ensure that they're more modest, but the restrictions imposed on men are not the same. So it could be something like that. So this slide is just an example of how the different forms of framing can be integrated into one type of motion. In this case, this house would ban school uniforms. I know I talked about the first one and the fourth one. Just to briefly touch on model and policy. Model and policy, this looks like actual implementations, or if you were to make like a real policy, like a legislative policy, there would be specific ways that we'd implement it, right? So in motions or in debate, it would look like routine checks on school or of school policies to ensure that they're not enforcing school uniforms, or routine surprise visits to a school to ensure that it's not being secretly enforced behind the back of the government. General illustrations could also be like additional tidbits or tidbits on how the motion would be implemented in real life. So for example, it may be reasonable in the spirit of the motion to say, we're going to ban school uniforms under the premise that they restrict some of the freedoms of their students, but it may be feasible to accept at government that there may be some exceptions when a certain type of dress code is necessary, like in physical education or laboratory classes where there needs to be a school uniform prescribed in order to ensure the safety of the student and their ability to fully participate in the lesson that is happening. Like if you wear maybe what we're wearing right now to physical education, you will not be able to run. If you wear what we're wearing right now to the laboratory, someone might get hurt. Okay, so this is just an acronym that I made up for the purposes of this lecture. But in most cases, framing should have direction, comprehensiveness, and foresight. What do I mean by that? First is direction. The frame and context must be relevant to building the solution, i.e., the arguments. And later, I'm going to discuss that some debaters tend to feel like the more that they say is true about the world, or the more that they say to prove an argument, automatically means that they will win the debate. And that assumes that debate is just an act of listing as many facts about the world as possible. And then the judge will just tally who said more things. And then who said more things is the winner. That's not the case. It has to be relevant to the debate, relevant to the clashes, relevant in terms of being able to respond to the main concerns of your opposing bench. That's why it needs to have direction. This is related to the second one, which is comprehensiveness, where the frame and context must capture the nuances relevant to the debate. So, for example, in a motion, this House believes that feminist movements in developing countries should oppose marriage. Obviously, a frame and an argument that is built on framing that is context only relevant to Western societies or Western liberal democracies like in the United States or in the UK, it might not be relevant if the motion is specifically asking you to debate it in the developing world, like in the global south, in poorer countries, in low-income communities, etc. Finally, for foresight, and I think this is the most important part, especially if you're the first speaker or if you're opening government and you're speaking before you even know what the opposing bench is going to say, the frame and context must mitigate likely claims from the opposing bench. And when I say likely, I mean you should not just be creating a response or thinking about or making saying the opposing bench might say this just for the sake of being able to preempt that argument. You should reasonably think about what are the common arguments that people will say. So let's say in the motion, this House would ban school uniforms. It's likely that government is going to say that school uniforms encroach on the freedoms of students. It's often used to impose modesty and restrict women or even people's expression, like if you're a gender minority or a sexual minority. Opposition feasibly also might argue that school uniforms are necessary in order to impose order, or school uniforms are necessary because not everyone has enough money to buy a wardrobe that they can routinely wear to school. And so class divides might be highlighted under a system where you can wear whatever you want to school. So you have to be wise with what you want to choose to respond. Because let's say if you're a prime minister, no one has said anything yet. And so you're free to imagine what people will say and respond to it in advance. You are wasting your time if you are responding or preempting to cases that never even come up or cases that are unlikely to come up. So it is more worth your time to be strategic with it. And then you might ask, how do you discover what people are going to say? That comes with time. It comes as you do more debates. It comes as when you watch more debates. It comes when you read more news articles and read more books, and you get a general idea of what people are more likely to argue for a certain type of motion with a certain type of theme in a certain type of context. So it really comes with building that or amassing that level of knowledge over time as you debate more. Some notes on this. So the first one I cover a little bit, which is that descriptions in a frame are not there simply to describe things. They're there to manipulate the debate into it being what you want it to be. If you know that the judge needs to believe in a certain type of reality or a certain type of world, then it is your job to frame that world to be true. And I do think that, secondly, there is some argumentative aspect to this already, since you are packaging kind of contestable claims as fact and truth. If not that, you may be implicitly prioritizing the characterization that serves your case. So the way I want to compare it is, when we're debating, you wouldn't debate in a tournament like Nalsar IV the same way you would debate someone in real life. When we're all here, we subscribe to a certain set of rules and guidelines. We subscribe to the judge manual, we subscribe to the judge briefing or the debater briefing, we subscribe to the concept of the ordinary intelligent voter. But in real life, there is no such thing as an ordinary intelligent voter. There is no such thing as a judge manual that guides every personal debate you will have with everyone in your life. And so what debate really is you are learning that language, learning that syntax, and debating and finding what is a true claim based on that language and based on that syntax, if that makes sense. So, for example, at least this is an example in the Philippines before. Because debate was a very liberal practice before, now it's a lot more centrist, at least in my country. It wasn't very popular to make arguments against Duterte, who was the president at the time. But now that we've adopted a more centrist mindset and political divides have become a lot more fragmented, it's now a lot more acceptable to run arguments that are in favor of the interests of Duterte or of Bongbong Marcos, or those specific types of right-wing pro-establishment politicians. So it's about understanding what what is allowed or what is normally intuitively acceptable in the audience, or in the case in your panel or your judge. Okay, so this is another aspect of framing. This is called building policies. So there are several parts to a policy, but where should you pick and choose depending on what's relevant? Sometimes policies can also ask, what is the core rule or effect of the policy? I think that's the most basic one. You, at bare minimum, have to explain what the policy is going to do. You also can ask yourself, who enacts the policy? Does the government enact it? Does the school enact it? Are there specific bodies in the government that enact that policy? Number three, what are expectations to the policy? So meaning, what behaviors do we expect people to have if they choose to abide by the policy? Number four is, what are penalties and repercussions? So this could range from more traditional forms of penalties like fines, being jailed, being a criminal, etc., to more softer forms of penalties and repercussions like social shame, stigmatization, ostracization, people judging you. It's in general, what bad thing will happen to you as a result of not subscribing to this policy, to motivate people to adhere to the policy altogether. And then finally, what are manifestations of this policy? And obviously, what you are allowed to say in this last part, the manifestations part, is limited or otherwise by how specific or general the motion is, because per the debate manual or most debating manuals, we are only allowed to discuss the motion to the level of specificity or generalness that it has. So if the motion doesn't situate it in a specific part of the world or a specific country, then you are allowed and permitted to debate the motion in different contexts and in different, let's say, regions or in different communities, because that's what the motion allows you to do. So let's have an example of building a policy. So let's look at the motion, this House supports academic streaming. And this normally comes with an info slide. So for those who are not aware, academic streaming is just the process of grouping students on the basis of academic performance. So it's like honors classes or classes specific to students that are in the top percentile of math, English, sciences, etc. for their grade. Okay? So going back to what we were discussing a while ago, at the minimum, you should be saying what the policy does. So for example, at the base of this, or at the top of this inverted pyramid, it is separating kids on the basis of academic performance. So this is intuitive. It is practically assumed by the motion, because assuming you do this motion, it comes with the definition of what academic streaming is. But the more complex parts are the second and third layer of the inverted triangle, which cover aspects about the policy that will make the policy feasible and reasonable. So it can prevent any case of opposition coming up and saying, oh, you're going to do academic streaming unfairly. You're going to, it's going to be in favor of kids that can bribe the teachers, etc., etc. That's the point of a feasibility clause, saying things like, how children are streamed or where they're grouped into their classes changes annually based on yearly assessments to accommodate for fluctuations in academic proficiency and academic skill. So that's what the process of academic streaming could look like. And I mean, while this is not directly a policy motion, it is a way that you could feasibly implement the policy, and therefore you're still allowed to debate it that way. But finally, there's also potential end use of the policy. So after the process of academic streaming, you could say that with all this information gathered and after students are streamed, we can use that streaming to influence resource allocation. So for example, you may not always have teachers that are good with certain types of students. Some teachers are good teaching students that are slow, not that quick. Some teachers only teach well or only perform well with a student body that is easy to pick up. So you can allocate teachers who are better at teaching, let's say, slower students to the students that were streamed at a lower percentile as a result of the knowledge of where they stand relative to their batch because of academic streaming. So does that make sense? It is not just saying that we are separate. It's not just you describing the motion, because when you come into the debate, everyone in the debate, especially the judge, is already expected to know what is provided by the motion and the info side. The top part, this part, that's not necessarily relevant because the judge already knows that. This other stuff, this one is relevant because it gives an illustration to the judge on things like how the policy can be implemented fairly, how the policy can be beneficial to students, how the policy can improve learning outcomes for students, which sets up more expounded versions of the argumentation that come out after implementing or after illustrating the policy. So this is another example of how we can view policy or model building. It doesn't necessarily have to be a cause and effect relationship where there's only one way to implement it. It is possible that there are some motions that are value judgment debates, so that THBT means this house believes that. It means it's a value judgment debate. But there are some motions where it's phrased as a value judgment debate, so it says believes that blank, but it's talking about a certain policy and whether or not the policy is good. In this case, it is compensating workers based on output rather than the hours that they put into creating that output. So if you see the Venn diagram, the bigger set of outcomes is that it's compensation based on output. But in reality, there are so many ways to compensate workers based on output. You can, excuse me, compensate them based on per units made. You can compensate them based on the percentage of the price per unit that is made. And if I were a prime minister that would try to make the setup a lot clearer, I would explain that these are different ways that the policy can manifest depending on what is relevant for the industry. So per units made might be relevant to assembly lines or industries where the product is a product. It's not a service. It's a finished good, like creating LCDs in Foxconn or something like that, right? Naturally, it makes sense that you can quantify how many units someone makes. You can suggest that we can compensate that by prorating it relative to how much they've made. But for industries that are more digital based or asset light, or their services like digital marketing or consultancy, or maybe like creating like digital marketing, but it's they're not quantifying it by individual posts made. Maybe sometimes it's a whole campaign where you make a video, a brand book, and all sorts of stuff. Those things aren't things you can directly quantify in a way that's fair. Sometimes one whole output, like in a digital marketing agency, is made by a group of people, and therefore how do you ascribe how much someone makes as a result of that? And therefore it would be reasonable instead to base it on the price of the overall unit or the overall service that was rendered, and that's how you distribute money across the workers. So again, it depends on what is feasible and what is sensible. I understand that in debate we abide by a different language and we abide by rules, but at the end of the day we still run sensibility checks to see whether or not the argument or the frame would make sense in the real world. Okay, so these are some examples on hard and fast ways to frame. These are just ways that I have, or me or my friends or people that I've debated with, have implemented framing in actual rounds that we've done. So this was done at a recent tournament. I don't know if you guys went to the tournament, but this house supports the disability rights movement's use of social model of disability and their advocacy, and specifically the difference between social model and social model and the alternative, which is the medical model, is just that medical model believes that the struggles that disabled people experience are rooted in the actual disability. And often that means it is the disability that needs to be fixed. Whereas the social model implies that the problems people experience with disability are a byproduct of the people around them, their community, or how they perceive disabled people. And therefore, what needs to be fixed is not the disability, but rather the people around that disabled person and how they interpret and treat the person as a result of that disability. So in this motion, I was in closing government. And by the time I started speaking, the arguments were just a back and forth between whether or not disabled people were living a good life. So, for example, opening government was arguing along the lines of the social model of disability is good because a lot of them don't feel empowered to take up certain jobs, etc., precisely because they're perceived a certain way. But opposition tried to co-opt that argument by saying precisely it's hard because the disability is hard, and therefore we need to always focus on the fact that the disability needs to be fixed. The way this was bypassed through framing on closing government was to first illustrate what is disability like right now. How much have we achieved in terms of inclusivity for disabled people? We argued that, or we framed rather, that it's not similar to what it was like before, in the sense that there were slurs directed towards disabled people, zero accommodations whatsoever for disabled people, schools wouldn't accommodate disabled people, period. We've achieved some form of reform to the extent that we're not harshly mistreating disabled people, but instead now the oppression comes from creating them as an other in an attempt to over accommodate them or over include them to the point that it looks patronizing. So it looks like accepting that someone may be disabled and allowing them to be your friend, but not inviting them to parties, for example, or hangouts, simply because you think that they'll be oversensitive and won't adapt well to the social situation of a party or drinking together. So it's that type of oppression that might not be as grave as the traditional forms of oppression and stigmatization that disabled people experience maybe about 10 years ago, 5 years ago, but it's still a form of oppression and exclusion that affects their lives on the daily and is a lot more relevant now. So that was the type of framing that we adopted. Another example is talking about priorities and time sensitivity. So, as you can see in the motion here, this House believes that the feminist movement in the developing world should advocate for state-funded compensation for housewives. There was a line of argumentation from opposition which was suggesting that no amount of money that a developing country government can provide a housewife will be enough for them to live on their own, which makes a weird assumption, right? It makes an assumption that for these housewives, it's all or nothing. You have to give them minimum living wage or just a living wage so they can buy a house, buy food, buy electricity without the help of their husband. And that's the burden government needs to defend. But in reality, what we did on opening government and subsequently closing government did it as well is to explain that for these housewives where most of the money or any money they make is locked into the hands and bank accounts of their husbands and their social freedoms are depleted under the rule of under the patriarchal rule of their home, what really matters to them is getting any form of money that no matter what happens is always going to be theirs. It doesn't have to be rent, it doesn't have to be food, it doesn't have to be a 6-digit income. It can just be a few dollars that allows them to take the next bus to see their family in a different town. It's just a few dollars to be able to start their own business. It doesn't have to be big. So there's also a form of framing which suggests that tries to bypass people that push you into a burden where it's go big or go home. You have to prove the fullest extent of the benefit. That's not always true. You can always use framing to justify that even small incremental consolation looking prizes of benefits are still ones that make a huge difference depending on the context in which we're debating. And we were allowed to get away with that framing because again, if you read the context, it's developing world. So we can make certain assumptions about housewives in this type of country, the quality of life, how much money they make, and then we can extrapolate arguments and frames from there. Next, before we proceed to the portion on responding, does anyone have any questions? I think I can accommodate maybe like one or two. Let's go straight to responding. So there are many ways to respond, but again, if we were to distill it to the bare essentials, it can come in three forms. First is to simply say no, that is not true. The second is to say even if it were true. And the final, which I think is an offshoot of saying even if it were true, is to weigh the contributions. So no is often referred to as a more direct form of response because it directly tackles the truth value of the argument, claim, or analysis. It can be done either through using facts to just disprove that overall it's not true, or structurally proving that a contribution is false. And while necessary, and while I do think that people should be making direct responses, when you default to just making direct responses, it makes the debate less holistic when you just use them. And that's precisely because when you're in debate and when you're arguing in debate, not everything someone says is there's not one objective truth. It could be entirely possible that two things can be true at the same time. So, for example, in the motion this House should ban uniforms, it's entirely Gov can be correct in saying that uniforms stifle the freedom of students, but opposition can also be correct in saying that there is another form of freedom that may be stifled because there might be students who can't afford a certain or might not feel comfortable or confident in wearing the same wardrobe over and over again in comparison to richer or more abundant peers that can afford to wear a new thing to school every day if they don't have a school uniform. And therefore, the point of the last two parts of that pyramid, even if and weighing, have to do with comparing those cases where both things can be true at the same time and and directing to the judge what should be more valuable or what they should deem to be more valuable. So let's explore that. Even ifs. Even ifs can be many things, but normally even ifs are either one, their mitigation. So it provides the panel comfort that any harm launched to you by your opponent isn't as bad as they make it out to be. And there are things that exist either they exist independent of the motion, meaning they will exist on either side of the debate, or they exist as a result of other externalities that might happen as a result of implementing or supporting the motion that might assist you in not making those bad things come true. Second is redirection. So it pushes that there are more important goals or outcomes that should be given higher order in the debate. So this is also common, saying that even if it were true, what's more important is that we get this benefit. We want to prioritize that more for reason number one, reason number two, reason number three. And lastly, it's to symmetrize, which proves that even if the claim is true, it is no different than opposition. I want to flag, though, that you should be careful with using the third one because I explain this a lot with my hands. Let's say this is the harm. So this is the harm on gov. Oh wait, left side. This is the harm on gov. This is the harm on op. Let's say op says your harm is going to be worse, and then you respond by saying that's symmetric. You also have that harm. No one is beating the other in the clash. You are at the same level of harm that happens. So you should never use this in isolation. You should use it sparingly, and well, not sparingly, but maybe you should use it with other forms of weighing and other forms of even if, because like I said, you just result in a deadlock or a stalemate. No one is actually proving that they are correct as a result of debating like this. So this brings me to weighing. There are many methods of weighing. One is implicit and one is direct. So for implicit, it is, in my opinion, weighing that does the job for you. So as a community, like I explained a while ago, there are certain rules and forms of language that we can all subscribe to. So we subscribe to the rules of debate, to the judge manual, to the standards of what an ordinary intelligent voter is, but we can't control things like the judge's upbringing, their biases, or their beliefs, which affect how easy it is for them to understand a claim or a frame or a truth about life that you're arguing. And therefore, you need to have some understanding, or at least like a guesstimation of your audience, in this case, the judge, and what is likely to be understood by them. And I think the simplest way to explain what I'm just saying is in a lot of art and media motions, like the whole this house supports media that depicts negative emotions or depicts depression or mental health issues, or this house opposes media that depicts minors in very violent or unsafe circumstances like euphoria or something like that. The fault that a lot of people have, especially now that debate is becoming more globalized, and even if you're attending a tournament that was intentionally organized by the Indian circuit, you could still run into fellow debaters or judges, for example, that don't come from your country, don't come from your community, and therefore might not be exposed to the same media, art, and culture as you are. And so when I was debating in the early days of the pandemic, and there were a lot of these art motions because, you know, Euphoria was popular at the time, BoJack Horseman was popular at the time, all these Western influences, a lot of people in the Philippine circuit, they would still argue using examples of Philippine shows in TV, like insert name of Filipino show here, insert name of Filipino show there. And that's good, right? If your audience is Filipino and can understand that. But if I'm saying all these Filipino examples and I'm saying it to Bunny or maybe you guys, you might not automatically understand, or it'll be very rare to find someone in the debating circuit from a different country that can understand that. And so the point of implicit weighing is that you want to choose your examples and your illustrations based on what you think the judge is likely to understand right away, because it undercuts a lot of the work you have to do in explaining the point of that intuitive claim. So you can spend more time doing stuff that you can't shortcut, like putting out matter, like doing more weighing, like putting out analysis, like responding. All those things that require a lot more time you can do because the easier stuff was offloaded to stuff that's easier for the judge to understand. Another example is scope versus severity of impact. Simply put, scope discusses how many people are affected by the debate or by the contribution. Severity is how deeply they are affected. So scope could be like, scope could be like saying if it's a scope could be like, in this room right now, if all of a sudden it rained, all of us would be affected. That would be very bad because obviously it would be difficult for you to walk to the debate venue. It would be difficult for you guys to go back to your respective accommodations, etc. Severity might be the difference between, if it's just a light shower, not many of us would be affected. If it rains really hard, even if you have an umbrella, it will be very difficult, right? So it's a difference between how many people versus per person that experiences that impact, how horrible or how good is it for them. Um, an example of this is in areas with high crime rates of crime and terrorism, this house supports government's increasing surveillance. So an example of weighing that has to do with scope is to say that it affects a wide variety of people, or increasing surveillance from the government is harmful to a wide variety of people because all of us have phones, all of us have text messages, and insofar as the government is surveilling us, all of us are affected and all of our privacy is affected. But severity could also be saying that there are specific types of people that might be expressly targeted by the government for surveillance because they exhibit characteristics, or they're part of a certain demographic that is profiled to be associated with crime and terrorism, and then they get the worst end of the stick as a result of the policy being implemented, for example. So that's the difference between scope and severity. And my personal view is that you shouldn't be using these in isolation. I understand that sometimes they kind of make it look like it's two ends of a different coin, where it's like government will be arguing that the impact might not be, or the benefit might not be that good, but at least more people get to benefit from the benefit. Or opposition will be like, less people get benefited, but at least they get more benefits, or they get to enjoy a wider array of those benefits. I would prefer that you do it together and try to make an effort to try to co-opt it, because at some, or at the bare minimum, try to explain whether or not we should care more about scope or we should care more about severity. So that's one of the two ways to really push this type of debate forward. Either try to prove if scope or severity is more important, or try to co-opt both and prove that you can successfully co-opt both. Next is stakeholder based. So what I want to teach for this slide is there's a difference between, as a third party observer, what we think people want versus there's a difference on what they want. So a lot of, I think, debates that have to do with personal perspectives, emotions, ignore the element of irrationality, that sometimes we will want a certain thing, but we don't know if we actually want it. Or maybe we want a certain thing, even if people don't think we want it, but we really want it. And that's what supersizes the benefit, even if from a pragmatic sense, it's not beneficial to us. And I think for this specific example, this house, as a top fresh graduate, would pursue a demanding but high-paying job upon graduation, i.e., big three management consulting, investment banking, etc., on government, or rather, let's say on government. Opposition might come up and tell you, oh, it's not worth it because you'll get stressed. So many people like literally die at a very young age as a result of working in top four accounting or top three management consulting. But on government, you could also argue that it does matter to you a lot, because when you're a top fresh graduate and surrounded by other top fresh graduates, there's a narrative and expectation around what you're supposed to be doing with your life upon graduation. You're expected to have a six-figure salary. You're expected to have a a job that allows you to travel the world. There are certain social markers expected of you. And so even if pragmatically it is very difficult to cope with a demanding job upon graduation, and you might suffer because your boss is mad, the workload is very high, what this actor cares about right now when we are debating this motion is about prestige, is about reputation. And while that is irrational, it is what the actor wants. So that's another way to approach debate as well, to play into people's like sensibilities, to play into how people feel, and using it as a way to incite urgency for things that don't seem logical or things that don't seem pragmatic in the debate sense of the word. Finally, this is the final thing: arguing. Um, Arguing can be broken down into four parts. There's the core claim, which is the headline of the argument, a demonstration or illustration, which is expounding on why the claim is true or how the claim will happen. Examples are like intuition pumps to enrich the demonstration, and then impact and weighing is explaining what happens as a result of the argument. So, for example, in the motion, this house would ban school uniforms. Maybe the first claim that we would make is that school uniforms affect students' freedom of expression. We would expound on that by demonstrating that often it's because school uniforms prevent students from making certain fashion choices that express them, whether it's expressing them through their favorite color or through their hair color, or more serious contexts like disallowing boys or people who are born male to wear skirts, because the assumption is that all men should only wear pants or only wear shorts. So that's a combination of both demonstration and example. And the impact there is that there are many people that aren't able to explore themselves, many gender identities that aren't allowed to be valued and affirmed as a result of things like these types of school uniforms, and therefore you should ban it. So that's an example of how it would be deconstructed. Now, what I want to talk about is something that I've been alluding to earlier in the discussion, which is, does more mean merrier? There's a metric in competitive debate, and depending on who you talk to, they have like a different name for it. Sometimes it's called logical rigor, sometimes it's called depth of analysis, sometimes it's called middle analysis. But really, what it just means, and when most people say it, what they mean is, how well did you argue the argument? And the misconception people have is that to ascertain how well an argument is built is simply based on how many structural reasons were made to back that argument, or how many things were said in order to make that argument to be true. But the reality is that just because you have more structural reasons or more arguments to prove a claim, it doesn't automatically mean that you're likely to win a debate. Because especially in British parliamentary and Asian parliamentary, it's not a tally of how much arguments you say and the responses you say will deduct points from that tally, but rather it is an assessment of how much do you contribute to the existing issues in the round, how much are you maintaining relevance across a discussion in opening, a discussion in closing, in gov and op, etc., right? And so, logical rigor or middle analysis does not always make the win, for the reason being that BP is primarily about being able to satisfy those clashes. So, what I want, or what I would prefer teams to do, is focus less on giving as many reasons as possible, but instead making an effort to take those reasons or take those claims and relate it to the pre-existing claims coming from their opponents. So, for example, a very common misconception in whipping or misconception in responding is that they always say, because we respond to all of the mechanisms, then the argument is dead. But sometimes they don't respond to the mechanism, they just respond to the outcome. And so they don't respond to the full logical extent of the argument. Sometimes you really have to evaluate what the contents of the argument are in order for you to actually make the response a lot better, or make the argument a lot better, in comparison to just like trying to launch responses without evaluating what the response, or what the point of the response is, and what it does strategically for the other case. So when is an argument enough? This is a non-exhaustive list, but if I were to give you a couple of ways to ask yourself if what you are building is enough, it could be, does the argument prove that the claim is true? Does the argument prove that the claim is relevant? Do we relate the material provided to the material provided to the opponent? But ultimately, always ask yourself to do sensibility checks. Because while it is true that you can make a lot of arguments, if the arguments do not make sense, then I do not expect, or ideally, judges should not be crediting them just because technically you explained them up until the impact. But if logically it does not make sense, judges should not be crediting that, you should not be arguing that. And ideally, we want to make it a practice to be more reasonable when we make claims, right? So always go back: is it logically sound? Does it adhere to the characterizations in the debate? Is it even based in reality or in the news, etc.? Always try to make sense. Okay, that's done. Again, I think we can accommodate maybe like a few questions, maybe like one, two, three, maybe. Yeah. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask now. If you're shy, you can always ask later. Yeah. Sorry, can you introduce with your name, and then they're allowed to say institution, right? Institution. Sorry, can you repeat the second part of your question? Role of the whip
All right. So the question is, what is the role of a whip? Uh, so some of this will be covered in the general debaters briefing in terms of what you can't do. So as whip, you are not allowed to bring in new argumentation. But as a whip, people make this mistake that they think they shouldn't analyze things that already exist in the debate with new levels of analysis. As whip, you are supposed to do that. So add new levels of analysis. Wherever relevant, add framing. Wherever relevant, add new responses. Wherever relevant, and where you can essentially add additional complementary context to existing material, you need to do that. So as a whip, while you cannot bring in new independent arguments, all of these other things that you can essentially weaponize for your side, you need to be able to do, because a whip is essentially the last person for the closing team, and the only person on the closing team that can essentially point out why the materials are the most important in the debate based on what the extension speaker brought up. So that's another thing that you have to remember. As whip, when you are making your responses and you're analyzing your argumentations, make sure that the attribution of credit for that specific analysis or those responses can be linked back to your extension speaker, so your member. Your goal is to make your member look like the most important speaker in the room. Do not do the same for your opening houses. If there are certain similarities, obviously benches will share certain things that they have in terms of goals, in terms of premises, but you need to show why the ownership of an argument, the ownership of credit, the ownership of specific responses need to be attributed to your closing half, not your opening half. In terms of conclusion, that's what you can essentially do, right? Are there other questions? Yes, yeah. Sorry. The motion.
Can you come here and then say it into the mic for everyone's benefit?
Also, if anyone at the back also has a question, I think you can already walk to the front. Maybe we can have a question line ready. So if anyone else as well, I think I saw another hand up.
Hi, just 1 second. I have my notes here. Right. So in the motion that was discussed, the disability rights movement one. So I was OG in that round. You were CG in that round. Just a question regarding that was that OO's main claims in that round were specifically about like how research in general will stop happening into the disability field and like disability research will reduce. So per your like stance on framing, can you outframe that impact, or do you like specifically rebut it and then move on to a different frame to like make that a wash in this debate?
Yeah, so part of the framing that we did in closing government was to explain that a lot of the research is already ongoing. So we can argue things like the sunk cost has already been invested. There are a lot of agencies that are already specifically designed to do that type of research. So in terms of it reneging and not happening anymore, that is very unlikely. So it's a matter of expounding the scope of what we want to do for disabled people. At least that was my view of the round.
That makes sense.
Thank you.
Any other question? I think I saw another hand up. Sorry. Where? Oh, yeah. Okay, to the left. Yeah. Implicit way. You want to take it? Yeah.
Okay, let me try to think of a specific motion. Okay, so when I say implicit weighing, it's more of putting emphasis that something is important by leveraging on examples or context that you think your audience or your judge might understand. So going back to the this house would ban school uniform situation. If I were gov, let's say, and I was trying to do implicit weighing, or just gov in general, and then I'm trying to do implicit weighing, and by at this point, op is already making the usual claims, which is that school uniforms are important, etc., etc. Um, I would do things. I would frame or illustrate the way that school uniforms are imposed. Specifically, things like, for example, they would measure your skirt in front of the whole class, or they would force you to remove your nail polish in front of the whole class. Things underscoring that the way that it is enforced underscores shame, humiliation, negative reinforcement. And therefore, the way that it is imposed is not just in general about decorum, it is more about infringing on their freedom. So that's what I mean by implicit weighing. It's about specifically choosing examples and illustrations that create a certain type of positive or negative connotation depending on what you want to do with your case.
Yeah, what I would add to that as well is when I was taught implicit weighing, similar to what Bea was saying, is you use context to essentially give reasons for why what you are about to say is important. So it just ties in with what Bea was saying. Any other question?
Yeah. Hi, my name's Prabhas. So from time to time, some adjudicators have said it's frowned upon to ask a question to the same side of the house, like opening government asking closing government a question. Any insights on that
As in during the debate?
during the debate? Yes.
Oh, so that's not allowed. So if you are adjudicating, obviously during the round, you can't stop the debate. But firstly, to speakers, you cannot POI or give any question to your bench mates. So if you are opening government, you cannot ask a question to your closing government, vice versa. And if you're opposition, you cannot do the same. If you are a judge and you're presiding over a room where that happens, just call order and ask them to sit. So you don't have to go into a long discussion on what they can or cannot do yet. Just call order, ask them to sit, let the debate continue, and after the speech is concluded, then you tell them you are not allowed to do that. You are only allowed to give questions in the form of POIs, statements, questions, clarifications, only to the opposing bench. All right? Okay.
Sorry, is this heard? Okay. And I think the logic behind that is so knifing, right? Knifing is when you contradict or you say something that is different from what your opening says. So let's say if opening government for some reason makes the argument that the sun is yellow, to knife my opening government is to say that the sun is blue, for example. And you're not allowed to do that because obviously that is a contradiction. You are still going against your opening government, obviously, because of the rules of debate, but you are supposed to be defending the same side, supposed to be adopting the more or less the same stance, the same opinions. And so I think the logic for why it's not frowned upon, to be clear, it is expressly not allowed. Like you're not supposed to be doing it. So the reason why is because in the same reason why knifing is bad, you shouldn't be POIing your direct opening because it is also it is the likely scenario that you will be contradicting them or you'll be saying the opposite, which creates confusion in the fact that you as a bench should be adopting the same stance.
Yeah. Any other question? All right. Am I missing anyone? Okay. So no questions, right?
Sorry, person with floral shirt.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry. Yes. Where's the mic? Could the mic?
It's over. Okay.
Hello. Yeah. Hi, my name is Aditya, and I just wanted to understand two things. First is the impact of a comparative when it addresses a diagonal argument. Say, opening government makes an argument and closing whip wants to make it, and then they make a comparative not directly addressing the closing half, but the first speaker. How would you evaluate those, especially when the clash isn't exactly clear, where they make arguments that are sort of in the same area, but they don't directly address each other? How would you weigh that? And yeah, Just that for now.
All right. I'm assuming you were asking from the perspective of a judge.
Yes.
Yes. So generally, you would want to hope that debaters can make clear, explicit comparatives. So usually there are areas in the debate that the burden suggests are already areas where each team is supposed to have some discussions. So it should hopefully be somewhat visible to teams and then to judges. If that doesn't happen, there are some there are methods to which you can adjudicate. The first is you look at what is explicitly agreed on as important in the debate. So if both teams explicitly say this debate is about the right to life, we have to defend individuals' ability to protect that right. One says this way is the way to do it, the other says this way is the way to do it. So that could be one area that you want to prioritize. The second is if they do not explicitly suggest that they're in agreement that this is an important metric in the debate, you then look at what is implicitly suggested as important. So via the analysis that they gave, via the stakeholders that they suggest, even if they're not explicitly saying this is what the debate is about, the context clues that you can get from the arguments usually, at least for most debates, will be able to tell you what are implicit materials and areas of the debate that you should then be able to compare. If, for example, that is still not sufficient and you still can't do that, if in most rooms, you at least have one team that is able to suggest something is very, very important and they are able to prove to a certain degree, even if other teams are not able to respond to it. If there is one area of the debate that a team has proven to be important, even if other teams have not responded to it, that could be the third way in which you adjudicate the debate, in terms of saying that then has to be compared with all of these other things that the other teams suggest are important. Then last way, if all of those other previous three ways do not work, you are allowed to look at the perspective of an average reasonable voter or an ordinary intelligent voter, just on a moralistic or like universal belief of what can be important. So for example, if it is a debate on protecting the right to freedom of speech, perhaps there are certain values that you might want to already attach to why those things are important based on what teams have already argued in the debate. So you can use that metric. But ultimately, you look at the motion and the burdens that can suggest what are the comparatives, even if teams are not immediately explaining it. But then you look at explicit, implicit, otherwise proven but not responded to arguments, and then you can look at a universal aspect of what can be attributed to being important in the debate to compare it with each other. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Just a small, can I take a small follow-up?
Yeah.
Right. So another aspect that I was a little confused about was you mentioned framing as a key aspect of the closing half for both sides. Now, if a closing opposition is adding new context and new frame, doesn't that effectively not allow the government to engage with it unless via POI, which would in any case not be a substantive engagement metric over there?
Not necessarily, because the framing, as Bea pointed out earlier, is a way in which essentially you sell your arguments, you sell your perspective. So you position the debate according to what closing opposition views as important. So introducing a new framing, even in closing opposition, is not in and of itself a bad thing. It is perhaps when they may introduce a framing that is so far removed from the entire debate or the rest of the debate that may then run the risk of them not being responsive, but it's less so an issue of them doing it and automatically resulting in them being removed from the debate. It's more so via the analysis that they gave that made them somewhat uncomparative to the rest of the debate. Right? You want to add anything? Any other question? Striped shirt.
Person with striped shirt.
Yeah,
Yes,
sorry,
you.
Yeah. This is the last question because we do have to move to the WGM forum. Sure.
I'll ask. Hi, myself Ayush Singh Rajput. I'm from JNLU and I've done like good amount of immigrants, but this is like my very first time doing DPT. So first I would like to thank a lot for the session, and upon that I have like made a draft type of the speech structure. So I will appreciate that if you can cross check with that and like let me know. So what I noted down that the speech should have like three parts: framing, destructives and constructives. And if we all go more deeper to that, so in framing
firstly, we should start with the opening hook, and in which we would be contextualizing that with the real life connection and connecting to the real life thing. Secondly, there would be policy formations in which we would be explaining the motion that how the policies will be laid out, and if there are any exceptions or the general illustrations, that is also mentioned there. Then we can also like foresight the opposition's arguments and like rebuttal it beforehand only. And after that, we will start the destructive part, and in which we would be rebutting all the arguments that are being placed by the oppositions. And after that, we would be switching to the solutions part, in which we would be framing our own solutions, and we would be telling the impacts and all. And after that, we would be just concluding that. So, is that okay? And
Yes, that is okay. It doesn't have to necessarily be in that order or exclusively just like that, but yes, that can be correct. Yes.
Yeah. So another thing that I want to point out is that oftentimes structure can be a very individual thing. You don't have to be bogged down by like the hard rules of what has to come first, what has to come second. As long as it is logically going to flow from one thing to another, and it helps you understand those arguments in order for you to sell those arguments and prove those arguments to the people listening to your speech, then you are able to sort of adapt to your own individual structure. Just have a structure is the takeaway. You don't have to have the same structure as everyone else, right? Okay, so that concludes the workshop, all right? So for the next bit that we are having now, this next portion will only be open to individuals that identify as women, gender minorities, or sexual minorities. If you are a cis male, unfortunately, this part is not open to you. We do ask for you guys to kindly exit the hall, but stay close to the area, because the briefings for the debate for the first round and some discussions on the first round, the draws, will be immediately after the forum. Yeah, yeah. So proceed. For those of you that identify as WGM, and for those of you that identify as sexual minorities, you are welcome to stay. We encourage you to stay. This is something that is relatively new, and we want you to experience it as well. No, the workshop is done. The WGM is just starting. Yeah. About 30 minutes. Yeah. What is that? So what does it mean? Is it supposed to look like an orange? That's cute. Mm. Very good. Thank you. Okay. Hmm? It sounds like you know, roll, like fish egg. It's like a fish egg texture to it. This is rice. What makes it orange? Oh. Yeah. Or yeah. But I think it's entirely possible that you make something completely new. It's just that there has to be a lot more legwork to put in that the
either the extension that is completely new is better at answering the concerns and the clashes that come from opening, or is completely more relevant altogether. So it's just a matter of framing, yeah, reframing that it's important. Mm. The all of it, yeah. So I think that will. So when it comes to things like that, unfortunately, we can't like not all judges are the same. So there will be some judges that are a lot more hyper aware of like implicit engagements. There are judges that are not so. And so I think it's better to just err on the side of caution and mention that it does beat out all time. Yes, yes, yes. I think it's better because you can't control what the judge tracks. It's better if you just feed it to the judge. Bye bye. Um, so right now we're going to have a women in gender and sexual minorities forum. It's mostly just an experience where we can talk about where women, gender and sexual minorities can talk about their experiences with competitive debate. Often these experiences do get raised so that we can create more policies and encourage more people to be more sensitive to these issues. So yes, you can join that. We encourage you to join that if you are someone who identifies as either a woman, gender, or a sexual minority. Yeah, that's it. And then, but good, thank you, thank you. Okay. Do you want coffee? Hmm? Coffee? Oh yeah, actually, yes. Okay, I'll take you. I'll take you guys. Let's go. Ah yeah, but we have to start this meeting. You prefer that I get it?
Hi, if you are not a WGM or a sexual minority, please do exit the room just for this portion. We will want to have a closed forum, right? If you have friends that are on the way, please let them know they can sit in. Also, if anyone sees the mic, the handheld mic, please let me know. I am looking for the handheld mic. Hi, does anyone see the handheld mic? The microphone? It's there? Okay. Okay, test, test, test. Again, if you are not a WGM or you are not a sexual minority, you are not allowed to be part of this forum. We are going to start. Please close the door if you're exiting. All right. So this is admittedly something that is fairly new. We were asked as the foreign invited adjudicators, the foreign chief adjudicators, so myself and Bea, were asked to consider having this forum, and we thought it was important, especially for norm setting. Could I ask everyone to settle down? Hi, guys. Sorry. Simra. Oh, okay. Sorry. Could you guys close the door, by the way? Thank you. All right, so this is fairly unique in the sense that I was told that the Indian circuit context is a bit different, simply because you do not have a national council for debating. So it makes it slightly difficult for some things to essentially be instituted as reforms for tournaments. It is slightly more difficult to sort of moderate broader discussions, and it is slightly more difficult to see changes actually being enforced by a oversight or overseeing body because you do not have a national council. So some of this is going to be very new to some of you, but the point of this is, firstly, welcome, right? So welcome to the WGSM forum. Usually you might have just a WGM forum, but we thought for this specific occasion, it'll be meaningful to have both gender minorities and sexual minorities convene. In this forum, we will be talking about specific issues that you might face. We'll have some discussion on what you can do on a personal level to overcome some of those issues wherever necessary, wherever relevant. And then we'll talk about what suggestions we can have as a circuit. So obviously we're coming in as people not from the Indian circuit, but we are able to perhaps guide you through the processes so that you can maybe push members within your own institutions, your DebSocs, and then hopefully the rest of the circuit to maybe push for better reforms. So we'll start with, I think, what's easiest to compartmentalize this forum. We'll have a range of questions and a free speaking order. If you feel you want to say something on this, please raise your hand. If you feel that this is something that is very close to what you are already thinking about, feel free to also expound on that and add to it. So we'll start with a few questions. The first, I think it'd be meaningful for us to start with just general issues. What are barriers you think you are facing at the moment in debating? You can speak from a personal level. You can speak from a DebSoc perspective. You can speak as a person who is trying to break through the Indian circuit. Does anyone want to start? What are barriers you feel you are facing? Anyone?
Hello. Yeah. So, hi everyone, I'm Tanishka, and this is a problem that I have faced, and it has become better over time. But it's just the number of women who are in the top spaces of debating. That is probably, let's say, judge like being at different high level competitions in India, or maybe being the speakers that we discuss during like preparations or that we refer to in the international circuit. And it's just the number of women who are or the number of WGMs who are generally referred to, which makes it very difficult for us to probably relate to these people and go ahead and have some kind of inspiration in the circuit.
Thank you so much. Anyone else? We'll just add to the list first, and then we'll have discussion. Specific to hopefully WGM and sexual minority issues, but you can also talk about certain other things if they intersect.
Hello everyone, my name is Dia. I hope I'm audible. So this is something that I faced as a member of a team where there's one female and a male, and there's a certain type of invisibilization of my role within the team itself, and it contains a certain amount of subtext. It's not something that's very visible, but I'm quite sure this is something almost every female debater has faced at some point, that you're not exactly recognized as a speaker the same way a male participant would be. So I don't know how as a country or even as a circuit we are going to work towards overcoming that, but it's definitely something that needs to be addressed, because I know for a fact that at least at one point in time in all of the debate competitions you've attended, or even if this is the first one, this is going to be something that you're going to face.
Anyone else? Yes.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Arohi. I'm from ILS. So I have two different problems that I want to explain. I think the first one is with respect to judging. When I started out judging, in most panels, I would often be the only WGM, especially in a couple of out rounds. And I don't know if this was something that was deliberate, but it's something that I noticed that a lot of men tend to be quite aggressive when they're doing deliberation, especially when it's like high stakes, it's out rounds. This is not necessary in terms of like perhaps physical aggression, but I think it really shows whether they'll cut you off a little bit more often or that they'll use a stronger tone. And I think when I started out, I was a little underconfident with respect to my skills. So this is something that I actively try to help out with my DevSoc and like other WGM judges that go ahead. And that sort of brings me to the second issue, is that I find it extremely easy as like running a DevSoc to have WGM debaters, to induct them, to train them, but then there becomes a significant gap in retaining them in the circuit. So there isn't a lack of talent. There exists like a lot of physical safety concerns. Like even for example, getting to Nalsar, getting an early morning flight and then coming from the airport to outside the city was such a big concern for all WGM debaters. And I think that is one of the most, I think, pertinent physical barriers that exist to actually have women to have like WGM individuals come to such competitions.
Hello everyone, I'm Khushi. This may not be a problem that's unique to the WGM experience, but I do feel that there's a lack of mentorship if you don't come from a very established SOC and you don't have a lot of seniors to look up to for guidance. It makes it a little harder to reach out to more established seniors or people in the circuit, because obviously they're not as willing to help as if as someone in their own SOC. And I think it's a problem that's exacerbated by the fact that, as Tanishka mentioned, that the number of women and gender minorities in the top echelons of debating in this circuit is really, really less. And I think if there were a few more of them, I think there's just a certain angle of approachability when you're talking to another WGM debater. So I think mentorship, especially as someone in a smaller, not very active SOC, is a major problem I face.
Hello everyone, I'm Harshita. I think this is a little bit of what Arohi already said, but with respect to how a lot of offline tournaments, OCs operate with their schedules. I mean, even in Nalsar, like I feel like OCs already have their own fair share of like issues with respect to schedules, and they want to accommodate maximum number of participants, which is why they arrange it in certain ways. But also, like it's a little less considerate if you consider like extremely late night rounds or just like delays that are unaccounted for. And this makes it extremely difficult, especially for WGMs who are probably coming from more conservative families, to just like get permission and stuff like that. And I think, I mean, I couldn't think of a particular solution for this except for just like decreasing delays and just like them being more considerate and more like thoughtful about the schedules. But this is also a huge barrier for people to just get opportunity to tap into these organizations in itself.
Am I missing anyone? Yeah.
This scheduling thing is something that I want to talk about in more detail. And like we can generalize it to gender minorities, but I think this is in India, it's very specific to people who are assigned female at birth. Um, and so I'll tell you what the situation kind of is. As someone who's coached in the school circuit and stuff, what you'll often see in the Indian school circuit is that there, I would say approximately maybe there's a 65-35 split in terms of gender division in favor of women. In schools teams, you will see girls taking charge. You will see girls participating in lots and lots of tournaments. You will see girls often outdoing the boys. Once you enter the university circuit, this changes. The first thing that changes is this ratio. This is a massively different ratio. Even if we look at a tournament like Nalsar, if you like try to create a proportion of the number of WGMs compared to cis men, you're probably going to have a significantly higher number of cis men. And I think the biggest reason for this is that in India, like of course there's many reasons, like there's a lot of toxicity in the circuit, there's a lot of deterrence from participating. But I think the main physical barrier here is that in India, there is a very ingrained culture of continuing to chaperone girls to wherever they go. And the age at which the vast majority of girls are considered quote unquote independent enough to be able to go to places on their own and figure stuff out and stay safe and stuff is quite high. So while for boys, maybe your parents will be okay when you're 18 or 19 to let you go to tournaments or let you travel around the country, yada, yada, yada. Without supervision, there are many, many girls who, like the scheduling issues that she talked about, especially if rounds end late at night or if tournaments are far from wherever your home is, etc., etc. I think the biggest deterrent in the mindset of parents is that who's going to look after our baby girl or whatever, despite the fact that these are adults. And then this infantilization and this need for chaperoning basically prevents a lot of girls from even getting the permission required to participate in a lot of these good offline tournaments. Yeah.
Cute. Yeah.
Hi everyone. So a lot of people have spoken about like scheduling issues, lack of mentorship, lack of representation, a lot of ratio issues. But I think the gender thing plays a role in a even more fundamental level, which is that the way men are socialized is that, at least in spaces like, I'm not saying that there is no variation, but there is a definite correlation between being socialized as a man and being used to being confident in your opinions, because the presumption over there is that you're right unless you're proven wrong. Even if you don't know something about a specific field, men are very open to immediately guessing. They're not like, okay, I have to cross-check everything, I have to read everything before I can make an opinion. Whereas for women or people who are not socialized as men, the presumption is that unless I've actually read up or something and I know about it, the presumption is of doubt until proven incorrect. For other people, for men, it's like the presumption is of being correct until there's a reason to doubt yourself. And this makes a big difference. You can see it in smaller scopes in class participation and things like that as well. Because men operate on a presumption of, like they're more participative. I'm not saying this is even across the field, but with men who are like debate oriented, law school oriented, those kind of things, this definitely becomes like a cycle for sure. And it plays a huge role. Like if you see like the first day of classes and nobody knows the material on an equal level, you will see that men are the ones who are participating the most, and that makes a huge difference in terms of debate as well, because the inherent confidence that they've been socialized with is very different from ours. And you can see this in a lot of different scopes, things as well, because men are very willing to have opinions on fields that they are not very familiar with, whereas women have to prove they know something about the field before they can say that my opinion is valid. So that's something for sure.
Right, anyone else? Am I missing anyone? Yeah, okay.
In all my experience over the years, we have seen that the fundamental issue that comes around when experiencing, especially as a minority, as women, with men is the fact that they have this mindset issue where they think that social equality, it equalizes to the biological equality. Like they would question, like, okay, tumhe equality chahiye, but why do you need the maternity relief then? Okay, you are getting paid for 6 months, and why the hell, what feminism, what equality are you talking about? Why do you need a coach in the metro train? But they forget about that the biological equality is not ki I am at par with a man, that okay, I can pick up 100 kg deadlift and all. But the core idea is about the opportunity that we have been denied for over the years, and that is being propagated over years and years and years. And still, it has been so ingrained in our mindsets that even women, they agree and they comply with these norms that have been created for us. And that is the real issue. You won't see misogynists only as men or from any other community. Women themselves are sometimes misogynist as well. They hate other women as well, because the patriarchy has been so much ingrained in our mindsets that we think that if we are born in a burning house, the whole world is on fire. We need to change that mindset as females, as any other gender, as minorities, and especially as men, so that inclusivity is a basic fundamental.
Thank you so much. Anyone else before I call for a recess for the first part? Yeah. Sorry. Oh, but did you? Oh, okay. Okay. Sorry. Can't see the faces.
Yeah, assuming I'm audible, I think, especially in India, credits that WGMs get are undervalued because they assume that, oh, these are diversity breaks, or these are things that otherwise would not happen if you were assigned male at birth or you were not a WGM. Due to which, even if someone performs extremely well, let's say they reach Nalsar finals, but just because they were not in the top 10 speakers, sorry, top 3 judges or something of that nature, you'll just assume that maybe if they were not a woman, maybe if they were not a gender minority, it's unlikely that they would have gotten otherwise. And I'm not sure this is the concept across the space in SCA or other regions, but there's something that I've seen wherein even my friends, even the partners of my friends have gone and said, oh, the reason you went deeper is because you were a woman instead of me, I'm a better judge, etc. So I think that is something that often plays out a role in how you value a WGM debater. So even if you see them as inspirational, others just short it down by saying that, oh, their credits are because it was a diversity break or it was something that specifically happened only because of their gender identification, etc.
Thank you so much. I'm going to call a recess on the questions for now so that we can just have a. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Hello everyone, this is Muskan, and I'd just like to make a point that I was jotting it down while all of you were speaking, that women face discrimination from the religious exclusion also. Because if I'm a religious minority, I'll be having double exclusion, which is the first is from the patriarchy we are here in the community, and the second is prejudice from the majority society, because I'm segregated from what they have as a common religion and all. So I think that is pretty much I'd like.
Thank you so much. All right. So as I mentioned just now, this is something that is fairly new in the Indian circuit, like having a dedicated WGM forum. We do want this to become more of a norm. We'll get to more questions after this, but I think in the interest of sort of like distilling some of the things that we've already discussed and dissecting what we can do about it, this may be relevant to just have a recess on the questions for now, or just like sharing session for now. WGM forum, as you can see, or WGSM forum in this occasion is useful for you to also have moments of expressing like grievances, catharsis, so that you can have the catharsis, but also just explaining the things that you go through. So that's one of the reasons why WGSM forum is meaningful. But for your information as well, like all of these things that we are discussing will be anonymized, but there will be a report that is made after the end of this forum. I will personally be making this report, and we will both be checking the intimacies of the content. But in terms of illustrating the challenges and barriers, these things are things we want to highlight as well, because as you mentioned, these should be taken into account when OCs are organizing schedules. These should be taken into account when OCs are thinking about only having physical sessions or physical tournaments. Perhaps they should consider hybrid if they are going to have longer run tournaments or tournaments that run into the long hours of the day or the late hours of the day. But I also want to talk about some things that you guys can do before we get to just the key issues. I understand that it is going to be a difficult or a different process altogether because I'm not entirely sure, and this might be something that after discussing with equity and maybe other actors, maybe there can be some discussions on the broader circuit having a dedicated council established, so the Indian National Council for Debating. But until that happens, my suggestion, as I think that this could be very meaningful, is for all the WGSM to also just collectivize and form their own group. So have your own dedicated council or your own dedicated chat, even if it's just a chat, so that you have a body that can sort of forward some issues a bit more meaningfully, but at the same time have some structure to the discussions that you can recommend as a unit, rather than it be, just things that happen on Facebook or things that happen on social media, perhaps a more dedicated task force. Because even in other circuits, when there is no dedicated like specific council group or council task force, they create those task force. So what I would suggest is that could be a start for the Indian circuit, and I think could be very meaningful. Obviously make it autonomous, meaning make it closed and make it only for the WGSM community, not for anyone else, because it is supposed to be a safe space. So there is where you also have meetings, maybe discussions, etc. Unfortunately, it does look a bit like we have to start this process, as in the burden is on us to essentially create this space. But ultimately, I think as some of us were talking about just now, it is also important to be that push if, for example, those external forces or external actors aren't doing it, right? In terms of very specific concerns, again, a lot of these things will be highlighted in the report, but in terms of what you can do to essentially highlight uneven crediting within debates, uneven crediting even within teams. Bea, do you want to cover that? Do you want to talk about how you can overcome that personally? Like, what do you do as a female speaker?
For context, I've been both on the debating and judging end. And yes, I think both as a judge, so there are bits and pieces of experiences that were shared in the forum that I have experienced as well. So experiences of trying to stand up to, I guess, more domineering, more aggressive male panelists or born male panelists, as well as, for example, trying to have I've had partners who are male before who, get quite aggressive even if they don't intend to be, or sometimes, for example, as a woman, I get undercredited. The unfortunate thing is that in the interim, while we're trying to gain more inclusion, get men externally to be more accommodating, to be more inclusive, to listen to us better, a lot of what I've done thus far to help me really had to come from inside. So I think for one, a lot of it was just I understand that there's a nature to second guess, but I think we need to reframe that in the sense that that's a good thing. It's good that we have the self-awareness that we know that there are gaps in our skill, gaps in how much matter we know, gaps in what we can do as a debater, as a judge, and we use that as a blueprint for what to do specifically in order to improve, so that our improvement, our accolades, what we win at every tournament, how deep we break, for example, is underscored by not luck, not by sheer confidence, but actually something that is based on grit, that is based on studying, that is based on rigor, and actually trying to appreciate the cognitive and cerebral process and art of debating, which is underscored on trying to read a lot. So I think it's actually, I understand that, in the moment, because sometimes some men, not all, I understand, but like some, especially some particular few, really get so comfortable. They really get so comfortable with getting away with everything, and they get so lucky. But we should not aspire to have luck. We should aspire to have skill, to be stronger. And I think that's one thing as well. Another is just it also has to be it has to be a community thing. That's why it's important to have things like this, because it's important to know that there are other women that feel the same way, if not a similar way, about how men behave in the circuit or how people externally behave outside of the WGSM subsect of the circuit. Because a lot of what made it easier for me to progress in debate was the knowledge that there were people that were also experiencing the same thing. That at minimum, if I couldn't like bitch and complain about it, I could at least just like understand that someone would understand me, because they wouldn't use my gender as a basis to not understand me. So that's why it's very important to continue to have female friends in debate, to continue to engage with women and gender minorities. After rounds, during rounds, have friends even outside of your own sub circuit or outside of your own debate society. Especially for those that don't have a lot of women and gender minorities in their own debate societies. So those friendships, those connections are very important. I owe a lot to the women and gender minorities that I've met along the way through debate. And I think it's important that you guys have those connections or that support system as well. Is there anything you want to add?
So another thing is, I also echo Bea in the sense that I've been in a team where perhaps I was the only WGM, or in some circuits, unfortunately, there is still the perception that a particular speaker role is not necessarily as strong as another speaker role. And what that means is, if you are WGM, you are put in that weaker speaker role because you are perceived to be weaker. Oftentimes, tabs and the results at the end of the tournament might prove otherwise, but within DepSocs, within communities, unfortunately, you might have those kinds of attitudes. And I think framing it into something positive is really, really good, and it's really necessary so that you also take care of your mental health and you don't, get into this dark space of just blaming yourself and feeling bad about it. But at the same time, I think there needs to be a willingness to call out, or a willingness to check those attitudes as well. Because what I've realized is, if you are prepping with a person who identifies as a male, there's very little tendency for you to question them. So I think the symmetric or like reframing your perspective, and also talking about how, or thinking about how, if you were in that position, if you would question, if you wouldn't question that person, you shouldn't be questioning yourself as well, is something that could be useful in terms of just how you can gear your mindset. Because unfortunately, as WGSMs, if you are in a team with cis males, you can be the lightning rod, the easy lightning rod. You can be the individual that gets blamed by your teammate, by your trainers, by your judges at the end of the day. But there's a need to also push back. So while you are looking inward and you are introspecting, and it's important to also think about how you need to make sure that those skills are just irrefutably good, you also need to make sure that you have a willingness to fight back, because that's particularly important. And sometimes you can't let the negative talk get to you, because as WGMs, when we listen to other people tell us the negatives, we unfortunately internalize it. And I think that's something that you need to push back against actively. And as Bea mentioned just now, having other people have these other experiences to also relate to is important. That's why building this community, I think, is the first step forward. If you can, have that group, have that dedicated WhatsApp group, if this is a more palatable platform. Start with nominations of who can chair this specific council. Start with nominations for who could be deputy, who could be equity officer. In the same way that you can establish a council in general, perhaps build that community so that it becomes something a lot stronger in the future, so you can push for that norm within the Indian circuit as well. I think there were other things mentioned just now about lack of mentorship. I think that the burden falls on people who are themselves capable of sharing expertise information. I think if you have a bit of privilege, you have a bit of access to networking, you have a bit of access to just working with people from other circuits, I do think that it falls on your shoulders a little bit to share that information with the rest of the circuit. So if you are in that position of privilege, I would urge you to try and spread that. But equally, I would urge individuals in positions of privilege, if they're WGSM, to not do things that could actively harm the WGSM community. Because I think this is particularly important. Because sometimes WGSMs go through things, they talk about their problems, and then they're either dismissed, they're delegitimized, and their concerns are de-escalated, but by WGSMs themselves. So I think, as someone was mentioned just now, there's internalized misogyny and there's pushback from your own community that can be hurtful. If you are someone in that position and you are actively harmful to your own community, even though these are experiences that are distressing, it could trigger warning, it could relate to sexual assault, it could relate to emotional abuse, it could relate to verbal abuse, all of these other things. If you are offering the cover of your friendship, if you are offering the cover of your relationship to someone who is actively also harming the community, that's something you have to sort of look at and be sure that you're ready to be held to account for. And the rest of the community, I would urge, should hold those individuals to account as well. Obviously, norm setting requires a bit more patience, so at times it can get messy. But I think if you start with building your community, having a dedicated space, making sure WGSM forums are continuous, and then potentially in the future having a dedicated council for the Indian National Debating Society or debating circuit, that could be a step forward in making sure things are cleaner and things are a bit more structured with how you deal with problems and how you can execute reforms. Other things I think are a bit more difficult to sort of just fix. Like, unfortunately, you will have individuals who are problematic within societies. We will make recommendations, and this will hopefully be a document that can be used by you guys, but also anyone in the community to sort of push for OCs to look at specific things. So like someone mentioned just now, if there's already physical barriers where WGSMs, particularly female identifying ones, are blocked from going to tournaments because the parental supervision applies unevenly, then perhaps hybrid needs to be a norm for those kinds of tournaments. Or it needs to be a norm that tournaments don't end up going into late at night, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll make those recommendations and hopefully you guys can utilize that, right? Anything that is extraneous, any last like things that you guys want to talk about?
No problem. All I wanted to say was that I think I agree with a lot of the stuff that you've been saying, but there already exists. So there is no like national body for Indian debating or anything like that, but there is an Indian Women and Gender Minorities Council that has been doing some good work. I don't think I'm the best person qualified to speak as to what they've been doing. All I've been doing is coaching for them. I think there's some. Yeah, sure. So there's a bunch of people involved, and every year there's elections and selections to choose who makes up the council. As far as I'm aware, and again, I may be wrong on this, but as far as I'm aware, there's two primary things that the IWGM, which is the Indian Women and Gender Minorities Council, does. The first is that there is a tournament. Last year, there was IWGM DC, which was exclusively for women and gender minorities. This year, there was IWGM Pro-Am. So the AM needed to be a woman or a gender minority. The Pro could be anyone. And so this tournament organization is the first thing that they do. The second thing that they do, which I'm involved in, and I think a lot of the other older debaters, is pro bono mentorship to people that have asked for it. So to the best of my memory, there were application forms that were sent out on the most common WhatsApp groups and this and that and Facebook as to who wants to receive this mentorship and who would be willing to offer mentorship pro bono. Then there were cohorts that were made with, I think, 2 to 3 mentors per cohort and a bunch of people in that cohort. And that is something that has been going on. Again, I can't really speak to the competence of how the persistence with which it has been going on. Maybe people drop off, especially when it's a pro bono thing. It's completely voluntary, etc., etc. But as far as I'm aware, these are the two things that the IWGM Council does. If you have more suggestions, I think people in the council would be happy to take those. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Incomplete information. I'll get to you 1 second. So I think, as mentioned just now, there's already a dedicated body. If you don't know about it, please do join it, right? So if you're not part of that council, please do. Even if it's not just a council, also create those groups where you can converse with each other quite continuously and constantly. That's going to help retain a lot of the WGSMs in the community, simply because you need that community building. But of course, I'll help with some suggestions on mentorship after this, but I'll pass to Aniket.
Krishank painted much kinder than it is. So I'll start with the mentorship part. The biggest issue we face is, so a lot of these mentors are not WGSM because of a lack of senior debaters are still active in the circuit, due to which multiple times I think the issue is that the people who are actually part of these cohorts obviously cannot connect with them or just talk to them as easily or as comfortably. Second, many mentors end up dropping out. Recently, we had a massive, I don't know the opposite of upsurge, whatever it is, a massive downfall of mentors in the program, and now we are trying to revive it. So the biggest issue is that mentors don't end up staying, irrespective of what. Of course, they have their own lives. The second issue that we faced with respect to same is, accordingly, we also are not able to provide as many pro bono workshops because people are just not as free. A lot of them are either just taken up by people who are already in the council like me, or someone else who's some friend who's willing to help out once in a while. The tournament this year was done with the help of two people who are not in the council, Nayantra and Lavanya. The good thing that happened is we were able to sponsor the reg fee of, I think, one team for ABP. And we were also able to provide 25, 30 slots for multiple Indian tournaments, including Nalsar. I'm not sure who it went to since I was not on the committee, naturally. But I think these are steps that we all taken. And this is something multiple SOCs can do themselves also, like raise funds through fundraisers and have a dedicated block that this amount of money has to go to fund one WGM team to some competition or one WGM judge to some tournament that is happening in India. So in the circuit that me and a lot of my friends belong to, it's cheaper because we just have comps all the time, 600, 700. We don't have to pay for stay, etc. But they are not considered as prestigious as maybe a Nalsar or an IT Bombay, which are outstation. Most people have to stay there because the rounds run till 10. So if other SOCs can just take up this and maybe have their own dedicated funding or budget cuts or whatever they raise from their tournaments, because multiple tournaments do end up raising profits, including IT Bombay, to be honest. They can just have a dedicated space for them, which is not happening as of now.
Yeah. So I think latching on to that, so please do talk to your representatives in your own debt stocks because as Aniket mentioned just now, you actually do have a lot of funding, fundraising efforts that can also have some portion redirected to this broader council. I also think that in the interest of who you can seek out or who you can talk to, not in the interest of like, if you want to know about who you can reach out to, if I'm not mistaken, the WGM officers for both, I'm not sure about the UADC and ABP one, but at least the Australs WGM officer is fairly active. I think that I can help connect you to them. Obviously, they will not be able to fix the internal circuit issues, but they might be able to redirect you towards resources that you can have. And I'm aware that they are also trying to broaden mentorship programs to sort of facilitate different circuits, particularly ESL and EFL communities. So perhaps I can connect you with them. Another thing I would say is if anyone from the existing council can also approach me later, I would like to consult with you about certain things so that when we do make those recommendations, they can sort of be a little bit more formalized, and then it can be sort of positioned to push for better reforms within the circuit. Yeah. Okay. So is that it? Anyone else has any last few comments?
Hello, I hope I'm audible. Yeah, I'm Sanjot, and I belong to GLC in Mumbai, and I get what both of you were trying to say, that you could go ahead approach your SOCs to make sure that they have some amount of tax cuts or like waivers for the comms that you want to go to. But being one of the only adjudicators who belongs to the WGM currently in my society, the problem is that the people who are actually debating, or be it cis male or anyone, there is this feeling of undervalued valueness to the activity itself. The more focus is on organizing a tournament where a lot of people will come, a lot of profit is going to be made, and people might have a lot of fun. And when a society focuses a lot more on that, it is very much difficult for them to provide WGMs this benefit, because considering the situation currently in my society, there is an severe underrepresentation of debaters within the council itself. So they are not going to relate to the problems that we face as debaters because they never debate themselves. So it becomes inherently necessary for us to basically make sure that how will they understand where we are coming from.
Sorry, so I can better understand where you're coming from. Who specifically do you normally communicate to for these types of discussions?
So usually, up till last year, since I was a part of the organizing council itself, we had our seniors, super seniors, who we used to go ahead and talk about things, and they used to relay the information to the big seniors into the circuit, and we need to, and then we used to have like a solution based. Currently, the trend that I'm seeing right now and the trend for the foreseeable future does not make any sort of changes that can happen because there is no relatability at all.
But they are not WGSM. To be clear? Like pure ordinances. Yeah, okay, I see. Okay, I think this I also resonate with this a lot. This is experiencing as well in the Philippines that there's a complete disjunct between the organizing body that is not involved with debate and the organizing body that is from debate. I do think for this one, the unfortunate reality is that the onus is a little bit on those that are part from debate to be able to communicate that context, to communicate what is necessary. And in this case, if it's for accommodations and sponsorship for WGSM, then that extends to that requirement. I do think this is very similar to in terms of solicitation of funding or solicitation of support, for example, I do think it requires, number one, more coalescing between different WGMs, specifically those that are in your situation that need more scholarships, need more support, for example, specifically from people who are in organizing committees but are not necessarily part of debate and therefore don't understand. In terms of being able to information share, like how much does it actually cost to do something, or how much does it actually cost to participate in a tournament, why is it relevant, what have we achieved thus far. I think you just have to make the steps necessary in order to communicate that story and then communicate that use case. I think that's just an unfortunate byproduct of having to ask for accommodation from people that don't necessarily come from the circuit. I think it's very similar to my thoughts on the discussion with regards to um, what WGSMs face when it comes to tournaments that are scheduled quite late, or they're being prevented by whether it's their school admin or their parents, for example, to go out. I think a lot of it has to come from communicating why it is important, communicating why it is feasible, communicating why the resources should go to you guys. And it's a lot of what I did personally to be able to solicit my own funding and support from my parents, who I had to debate with in order to allow me to even go here. So it's a constant discussion that you always have to keep the relationship and the engagement hot. You can't just talk like once and then allow it to fizzle. Like obviously you won't get everything you want at the start, but you have to keep the conversation hot so that you can continue to ask for more support, to cover more teams, to provide more logistical provisions. I think my personal view is that you may not necessarily be able to get support locally yet because of the gender ratio between amongst those that are in, I guess, higher levels of debating in the Indian circuit. But I think internationally there is a great network of WGSMs that can be able to support you, and so participating, in more debate events, trying to network and reach out to your adjudicators, those that come from different circuits with, I guess, stronger or more experience with regards to these types of affairs, I think is definitely helpful and a great starting point as well. I'm sure Bunny is willing to extend support. I'm sure I'm willing to extend support to the best of our ability that we can. So yeah.
As we have been saying just now, keeping the conversation hot. I do think that again, I might have incomplete information on this, but if you are able to use the entire unit of the council that was talked about just now to forward this push, it becomes less so just you against your DepSoc, but rather this entire community against that DepSoc. And I think that's one way that you can also just push for better DepSoc treatment of debaters, not just people who belong to the DepSoc as organizers, right? And of course, work in tandem with other external bodies as well. So if you can get support from someone a bit more networked in the international circuit, that will help as well, right? Okay, so I think in the interest of time, unfortunately, we do have to call a close to this WGSM forum. Again, there will be a report that will be publicized. Names will be anonymized. But in terms of making recommendations to the broader council or the recommendations to the broader circuit, we're hoping you guys get to benefit from that as well. All right, thank you, everyone. We will proceed with the briefing shortly.
chef's here already. So just waiting on chef.
We did take a lot of minutes and stuff. So, if you like need a recap of what
I would love it. So I took some minutes as well.
yeah, like I know moderating and stuff.
Supplemented with yours.
I give you my number, you can text me and I'll get back to you.
Do you have
Yeah, message me.
is that better? Because my WhatsApp is down.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. Bye.
Sorry about the misinformation. I knew about the tournament, but thank you so much for your participation.
Okay, hello. Hello. So, we are doing draws now. We are going to find out the samples. Who wants to do briefings?
I think it's
You get two one each. You do allocations. Let's go to the other room. और judges को जाना judges need to go to Junjunwala.
Judges, please head to Jhunjhunwala for the
think this
judge
is yours.
briefings right now.
Yeah,
Where's Jhunjhunwala?
equity briefing will split up. Same thing. Equity पहले करवाना. The issue is this does not have capacity. I will tell them. Yeah.
I think that's yours. It's more cool, but yes.
Hello. Judge briefings will be happening at Junjunwala Hall, which is on the other side of the academic block. All adjudicators, please make your way to Junjunwala. Thank you.
Just keep it open 1 second. वो अलॉक्स कर रहा हूँ. Keshav.
And where is Keshav?
Add him. I'll call him.
If you could send this, then make a contact. Is there an OC member overseeing Mumbai?
Okay. OC told me what. Can you show me the name again? Sorry.
Yes.
Classroom
14 @nalsar.ac.in.
This agro.
Oh yeah, sure. The documents, yeah.
Yeah. I think slides would work better. Either works, either works. I think you just move it on slides and keep it open.
Google Slides is
No, this is fine. Please fine. The judge briefing. The judge briefing is only 10 slides, so I feel like I should have taken that instead.
Yes, please.
Much better. Yeah, thank you. I can take this one. Hello, hello. Hi, guys. Just silence for 1 second. I just want to clarify one thing. The speaker briefings are happening here. The judge briefings are happening in another hall. So I just want to make sure there are no judges here that are missing out on the judge briefing. If there are any judges, take a minute, move to the other hall so that you can listen to those. Only teams and speakers need to be here. Everyone's a speaker? Yes? Okay, cool. We'll get started then. First, just general rules of BP debating. I'm sure all of you have practiced a lot, and I know you're all really excited to get into rounds. This is for people who are new to debating, and just to recap and make sure that we're all following all of the rules. General rules then. The motion is going to be announced over here, following which you will have 15 minutes of prep time. The prep time starts as soon as motions are released and clarifications are done. So once all of the questions have been clarified and there are no further doubts, teams are requested to move to their halls and their classrooms, which you can see on your TabbyCat link. The debate will start immediately at 15 minutes. You will not get a grace period beyond that. Next, what is the time that you have for each of your speeches? You have 7 minutes of time in which you can bring in any constructive material. There is a 15-second grace period, so you can wrap up your speech and conclude by 7:15, but that doesn't mean that you treat 7:15 as the benchmark and you extend it till 7:30. After 7:15, no judge at this competition is going to be noting anything down. So whatever you have to say, make sure that you're including it in the first 7 minutes of your speech. Cool. Lastly then, POIs. A POI is a point of information. So it's a question that you ask another member of another team in between their speech. This can be regarding their case. This can be regarding a clarification. This can be regarding any questions that you have with the case that they're presenting. The POI can only be asked after the first minute and before the 6th minute. So the first and the 6th minute, so 0 to 1 and 6 to 7, are protected time. No POIs are entertained at that time. You're not allowed to ask a POI in those minutes. After that, it's fair game. There's a small rule over here. Make sure that you're spacing out your POIs in every 15 seconds. So you cannot ask a POI, and if you've been denied, you can't ask it again until a minimum of 15 seconds have elapsed. Additionally, if your closing bench or if the other bench on your side has asked a POI, you also have to wait 15 seconds before you can ask another POI. Please do not badger speakers. It becomes extremely hard to maintain a train of thought when people keep interrupting you. So just be equitable and make sure you're keeping a sufficient time lag in between people are accepting POIs. Lastly, people from the same bench cannot POI their openings. I don't know if this needs to be clarified, but yeah, if you're opening gov, you cannot POI closing gov. If you're closing op, you cannot POI opening opposition. You're the same bench, so you're representing the same sides. POIs can only work when the opposing bench questions you. Cool. That's about it then. Lastly, it's rankings. So first to fourth, 3 points for a winner, 0 points for whoever is fourth. There are no ties allowed in BP. So that's about it. Cool. Why it's not working? I'm just going to quickly cover the basic motion types that you're going to see at this tournament, just so that you guys know what are the burdens on each motion that it presents on you and what you need to fulfill in each individual motion. The first 3 motions, which are this house believes that, this house supports, and this house opposes, these are truth, value, or just value judgment debates. So you have to assume that whatever is happening has been enacted, and then you have to debate on whether or not this is a good thing. For example, this house believes that we should ban alcohol. You don't have to prove how the ban of alcohol is going to happen. You don't have to give exact steps for it. So you don't necessarily need a model in THBT motions. You can just assume that something exists, and then you can find ways to prove why this is either a good thing or a bad thing. Any questions on these motions? I'm going to go more into detail, but just right now, the simple burden that I want you guys to understand is THBT, this house supports and this house opposes. There is no inherent burden on Gov to prove that these things are necessarily going to happen. You kind of just assume that this thing exists. In most cases, it will exist. You just have to debate about whether it's good, whether it's bad. Any questions so far? Thumbs up? Perfect. Let's spend a little bit more time on this house supports and this house opposes. So there is no middle ground that teams can find. So if it's this house supports the ban on child labor, I'm coming up with really problematic motions. I'm sorry for that. But yeah, if you have a motion which says this house supports X, you cannot choose the degree to which you support or you oppose X. You have to oppose it or support it in its entirety. So you can't say, oh, maybe in some instances this is good. We just oppose it in some instances. That's called squirreling of the motion. So you're avoiding what the motion actually demands of you. You're not dealing with what the debate asks of itself, which means that you're more likely to lose. So if it's a this house supports or a this house opposes motion, make sure you're opposing and supporting it in its entirety, in all relevant instances in which it's likely to establish itself in real life. Lastly, you can prove or give examples of instances in which this is likely to happen. So if it's a debate on I don't know, this house will ban alcohol. You can prove, or this house supports the ban on alcohol. You can give examples that, of course, we're not talking about medicinal alcohol. We're not talking about alcohol that has other purposes. The most reasonable interpretation of this motion is instances in which it's most likely to happen, which is just of alcohol of recreational use. So you have the ability to characterize what is the most likely idea or the most likely scenario in which these things are going to play out. But once you do that, you need to prove that this is the most likely alternative, and then you need to propose or support or oppose it in its entirety. Do not find middle grounds. It's not going to play out well. Cool. This house prefers motions. There are two distinct types over here. There's this house prefers X over Y. So you have to prove why X is better than Y and vice versa on opposition. The other one is this house prefers a world in which XYZ happens. So in prefers, it's just which is better. Again, it's similar to THBT. In this house prefers a world, teams on government have to prove what this world looks like from the entirety of time. So from the point the Big Bang happened to wherever we are right now, what is the change that the motion has given you? How does the world change? What does society, what does the world look like? How have things changed? And then you need to prove why this hypothetical counterfactual is a much better and ideal world than the one we're living in. Opposition benches in this house prefers a world have to deal with status quo. So the world as it looks right now with nothing else changing. Are we all clear on this house prefers a world? So you cannot get away with not having a counterfactual. You cannot get away with not proving what the difference in the worlds will be like. This house prefers the world. Make sure you're weaponizing this like from the inception of time idea to its biggest extent so that you can prove that both of the worlds are diametrically opposite and your idea is so much better. Are we cool? Clear? Amazing. Lastly, this house believes that X should do Y. This is again just a similar THBT motion. You're assuming that X has the capacity to do Y, and then you're again debating on whether or not this is a good thing to do or this is a bad thing to do. Nothing changes much. Again, you can frame likely ways in which this is going to play out. So you don't have to assume, oh, it's going to happen, so we don't have to deal with it. You do have the ability to talk about what this is going to look like in real life. How is this policy or whatever X is going to do? How it's most likely to play out in the world. Again, very similar to THBT, nothing much changes. Lastly, this house would, I don't think this is last actually, but yeah, this house would or this house will. These are policy motions. So on government, you have the burden to establish a policy. You have to describe what the model of how this policy is going to pass is going to look like. So you have to give a step-by-step analysis of the ways in which the government or whatever actor is defined as in the motion is going to carry out this policy. Once you've done that, once you've fulfilled that burden by providing a model, at that point, you can then shift and just talk about what are the ways in which this policy is good or bad. Similarly, on opposition, you do have the ability to counter prop. So if proposition has the ability to model what their policy is going to look like in most scenarios, opposition can either deal with this and talk about why the policy that it exists right now is insufficiently explained by government, or why this is unlikely to happen, and there are other different policies that have better benefits and lesser harms. So if proposition can model something, opposition has the ability to also model something. You have to prove which model is likely and which model is going to be better. Again, proposition must prove that their policy is going to work and the ways in which it can happen. Opposition does not need to necessarily give a counter model. They can just prove that the policy is bad. Yes. Like I said, it's not necessary. So if you think that you have a better policy which can reach the same impacts, then you can do it. But there's no explicit burden on opposition. You're not required to do it. You can choose to do it. Yeah. Okay, not really. So if it's this house will ban alcohol. On proposition, the idea is you just ban it. No one is buying this. No one is producing it, anything. On opposition, you can just say, we're going to regulate this. So very few trusted people have the ability to manufacture it. Very few trusted people have the ability to purchase it. So the end impact is the same, which is that you decrease consumption of alcohol, but there are different ways in which you're reaching the similar impact. Make sense? Yes. Could you be a little louder so everyone else? Yeah, so really good clarification over here. How do models compare on benches? So if opening government gives a model and it's a reasonable model, which means that there's nothing explicitly superly wrong about it, then closing gov, yes, has to defend the same model. If opening gov has really screwed the pooch, so if they have an absolutely whack model and it doesn't make any sense at all, in those instances, you can first just preface that opening government is unfair in the way that they're carrying out this model. Their model is unlikely to work. which is why we have the ability to provide a better model, because opening governments is unfair to us as well. So in most instances, this is unlikely to happen. It's unlikely that at closing gov you have to add more parts of the model. It's actually highly discouraged to add additional parts of the model in which you make your case stronger. So yeah, in most instances, better to stick to opening gov model, unless it's actually horrible and it doesn't prove anything, in which case you do have the ability to like fix it around a bit. Any other questions? Any other clarifications? Are we all cool? Perfect. This house regrets. I want to be very slow over here because this is a motion that sometimes people get confused in. In this house regrets, you again, it's similar to this house prefers a world. So in prefers a world, you're talking about how from the inception of time, something has changed, which is why your world is different. In this house regrets, you talk about how the world would have been better from the point in which this instance happened. So I don't think there's an example. Oh yeah, this house regrets the rise of NATO after the fall of USSR. So you don't have to prove from the beginning of time if NATO ever existed or was dominant. You just have to talk about from the point in which the rise happened. If it did not happen, the world would be better off. So a regrets motion is firstly retrospective. So you're regretting things that have already happened. You can't always come up with like speculative things that might happen in the future. You can do it, but the general is it's retrospective. So harms that have already happened and can be traced back to stuff right now. Cool. Additionally, because you're proving that the world right now is pretty bad, you have the ability to give a counterfactual. So again, what the world would have looked like had this thing that you're regretting never happened. Okay, so if you're regretting the rise of NATO, first you prove why it was bad, and then you prove that at the point at which this rise happened, if it didn't, the world would have been so much better. So again, with this house prefers the world, you're creating a hypothetical scenario in which the world is better off. You're doing the same thing with this house regrets. So from the point in which the thing you're regretting never happened, why the world would have been so much more better. Are we all clear with the burdens on this house regrets? Yeah, any confusions? Amazing. On opposition then, you just have to say, we don't regret it. The world right now is pretty chill. Their counterfactual, their hypothetical world would have been much more worse off. We're okay with the way things are right now. You don't need a counterfactual. You don't need a hypothetical world on opposition. Opposition, again, you're defending status quo, similar to this house prefers the world. Cool. Actor motions. Actor motions are quite fun. So in this house believes that, so THBT, THS, THO, you're just talking about the majority of stakeholders that exist, right? So who is benefiting the most important people? Who is benefiting the largest number of people? Stuff like that. In actor motions, you don't need to care about the rest of the world. You just need to care about what are the incentives and what are the interests of the actor. So if this house as India would ally with China, you don't have to talk about geopolitics. You don't have to talk about how Russia or US will be impacted. You just have to prove that it is in the interest of India to ally with China. The actor is the most important person in an actor motion. So you just have to prove benefits or harms that happen to this one individual stakeholder. You can, of course, break down these actor into different things that you think are plausible. So if it's a debate about the feminist movement, there are probably other different sects that exist within the feminist movement. So one that is more LGBTQ aligned, one that is talking about like better wages, one that is supporting abortion rights and stuff like that. So you can allow segmentation of the actor if you can prove that these are reasonable outcomes. But yeah, an actor motions only benefit the actor, the most important person. Even if the rest of the world burns, but your actor is okay, you're winning this debate. Cool? Yes. No, so you have to prove why the segment you're supporting is the most prominent one as well. It is better to just support the actor in its entirety, because with fragmentation, you may be able to prove that one particular part of the actor is the most important, and at some points you may not be able to. So better to just talk about the actor as a whole. Yeah? Cool. Any more questions on actor motions? Yeah. Sorry? Yeah, that's just an argument. So if you can prove it, you can run it. That goes for all arguments. Cool. Any other questions then on actor motions? Yes. Could you be a bit louder? I can't hear you. You can be as unempathetic as you want to be. Like I said, the rest of the world can burn. It's irrelevant if your actor is doing okay. So if this house, as Donald Trump, would nuke China, If Donald Trump is happy with this decision, then that's all that matters. It doesn't matter what happens to China. Cool? Perfect. Lastly then, so this concludes like all of the different types of motions that you're going to see over here. We've covered THBT, this house supports, this house opposes, this house regrets, prefers a world. Are there any questions on any of the motions? Is everyone clear on the burdens that the motions place on you? Any questions, anything? We're all friends here, so don't feel shy. Yeah. I'm getting to that. That's in rules of debating. Cool. Oh, okay. Cool. Lastly, then, let's just get into general rules of debating. The first prep time, you have 15 minutes once clarifications are done. Some printed materials, so if you have matter files that are already printed, then you can use those. If you have digital matter files, those aren't allowed. So only printed material can be used. Do not access the internet to make arguments. We're all smart judges, so we can tell when ChatGPT is involved in your speeches. Don't try and do that. It's very unsportsmanlike. It's a debate. Just try and be sportsmanlike. Cool. Motion clarifications will happen over here. So as soon as the motion is released, if you have any questions with regard to, let's say, definitions in the motions and stuff like that, that is stuff that you can ask. You cannot ask us what is the stance that Gov has to take or OP has to take. That will be sufficiently clear in the motion. Just read the motion twice. If you think something is explicitly unclear, only then feel free to ask clarifications. Cool? Yeah.
Download the material.
No. So anything that's digital cannot be used. Manual. Cool. Again, yeah. You can use laptops in prep, but you cannot use the internet, right?
No laptop.
No laptop? Okay, so so apparently you cannot use any digital devices for your speeches. Ajis can use like a laptop to take notes. Speakers cannot do that. It's just because there are too many speakers for us to track, and just for good faith to make sure that everyone's being fair, it's better to have paper notes and write down your speeches on a notebook and stuff like that. Cool.
Just for clarification, if you are a speaker, you are not allowed to use a laptop at any point during the tournament unless you have been given express permission for a medical reason. You are not allowed to use a laptop, even if it's something that you're more familiar with. Unfortunately, that is just the rule of the game. Yeah.
And you can't use phones. So just because we've said you can't use laptop doesn't mean you can use other digital devices. No digital devices, maybe just like a stopwatch. At best, there will be, like the judge will keep time and all of that stuff. Yes. Cool. Definitions. So teams are like supposed to deal with a reasonable interpretation of the motion. So you can't come up with extremely whack definitions and expect teams to debate on that. Again, tying back to the example that I gave earlier, if it's a this house will ban alcohol motion, you can't talk about like different forms of medicinal, scientific alcohol and stuff like that it's used. That is not a general implication of what the motion asks of you. That's a random analogous example. So you can't force the debate into those things. That's not fair things. You can't restrict the debate to a particular domain. So if it's an IR motion and you're saying it's a US and China motion, but I'm going to place it in, like, say, South Africa, you can't do that unless you explicitly prove why that is the most likely scenario. In most instances, it's better to just deal with the actors and the scenarios given in the motion. That doesn't mean you have to like only think along those lines, but that you can't restrict the debate to particular actors or particular things unless you can justify that it's sufficiently proven. Cool. Definitional challenges. So if the, again, we hope that it doesn't come to this. This is in instances in which teams aren't dealing with the most apt or like the most general reasonable interpretation of the motion. In those instances, if opening gov PM gives a weird definition, then LO and the other teams can challenge it. This must be done in the LO speech just to make sure that you aren't continuing a messy debate further on. A definitional challenge, again, does not automatically mean that your new definition is correct. So if they have a weird definition and you're saying that's weird, but we have this other one, but that also is not a reasonable interpretation of the motion, then it doesn't count. You have to deal with and you have to challenge the definition with a reasonable interpretation of the motion. Cool. Fiat then. Yes. Yeah, you can record your speeches. You can ask for consent from the other teams if they're cool with it, because at times POIs can be heard. In most instances, it should be fine. You should be good to go. Cool. Fiat, what is the definition of fiat? It is the instances or the things that the government teams assume in the motion that it will work. So in some motions, such as THBT, they do have fiat to claim that this thing is going to happen. In some instances, it can happen. And then you can debate upon whether or not this is right or this is wrong. This doesn't mean that the government is immune from anything. So they can't just fiat, oh, our policy is amazing and it's going to work out in all instances. They have fiat to create a policy, but they have to prove why that policy is likely and why it's going to work. Make sense? Any questions on fiat? Additionally, fiat also applies to opposition. So opposition can have a counter model or alternatives or a counter proposal. But again, they need to prove why that is the most likely alternative, why that's the most reasonable counter prop and things like that. So you do always have to give one additional line of analysis to prove why this is the most likely thing to happen, why this policy is actually going to work, things like that. You do have fiat to prove what the policy is going to look like. Counterprop, I've already explained, is just when opposition has a counter model, they want to disagree and have different ways in which they want to appear to do the same thing. Again, this is not explicitly required. You can have it in some instances. You can choose not to have it. Not an explicit burden on opposition. We've already covered this earlier on. Consistency then. So you can't have two opposing speeches. So if PM says alcohol is bad, DPM cannot come up here and say alcohol is good. You need to make sure that case lines are largely like consistent with each other. You can have even if analysis that is separate, that does not come under inconsistent rules of debating. Lastly then, if there are contradictions in between speeches, then only the first thing that has been said from a team. So if PM says something, but DPM contradicts it, then only the PM ideas will be accepted as true. DPM's counterproductive ideas will just be ignored because they're inconsistent and they're contradictory to what has come earlier. An info slide then, for those of you who don't know, is going to be a small slide that comes before the motion itself. It's used to just clarify the motion or give some additional information that may be necessary. You're going to know what it looks like in the motions itself. The iron person policy is one round. This is inclusive of the equity opt-out policy. An iron person, for those of you who don't know, is when a team only has one member giving both of the speeches. So if you have an equity opt-out, then you can ask equity if it's okay to opt out, in which case your teammate can iron person. But regardless of that, you can choose to just give your speech in general. Yeah, I've explained that. One round iron person, inclusive of opt-out. So one exclusive, one inclusive. They cannot iron person. They can. Okay, cool. Clarification, my bad. You can iron person 2 rounds. So you can choose to not give speeches. One is like a general in case someone doesn't wake up and stuff like that. One is with regards to like an equity opt-out. At maximum, you can only iron person 2 rounds. You will not be break eligible if you iron person more than that. Cool? Yes. No, the person who gave the speech, not the other person. So if you are giving PM and DPM, you're going to be given the score. The other person will not be marked for that round. Cool. It doesn't. Yeah. So for the person who's giving the speech, it doesn't. For the person who isn't present and is not giving, then it's just like a blank ballot. They don't get any speaks. Cool. Anything else? We're not going to disclose that. Irrelevant. Anything else? Cool. Feedback from judges. We have circulated a judge feedback form. Please follow the scale accurately. Do not be vindictive in your scoring. Just because you've given a 4th, but the judge has explained it adequately, does not mean that you can give them a low score. Judge them on the basis of their justification, not of the verdict that you've received. The scale is from 1 to 10. No 0.5s allowed. Just make sure you stick to the bracket. Cool. General conduct, make sure you listen to equity and that you're equitable in all of the things. Do not like harass anyone. Do not badger anyone with too many POIs if you are like within 15 seconds and stuff like that. And lastly, just learn. We're all here to debate as a sport. So have a good time, learn a couple of things, ask questions, and yeah, enjoy Nalsar IV.
We will now move on to equity briefing. For the equity briefing, we want everyone to please pay attention to the equity briefing. Please do not make noise while the equity officer is giving the speech or delivering the equity briefing. Yeah, please direct your attention towards the equity briefing.
Am I audible? Yes. Am I audible? Okay, yes, I am. Now I am. Okay, I will keep this quick. In general, I guess the policy basically outlines general decent human behavior. Be nice to others. Make sure you're taking their consent before you engage with them, either privately or in a personal space. But overall, the idea is just that be respectful. I don't know. Okay. Make sure you're not misgendering them. Make sure you're not being discriminatory towards them. That includes being discriminatory like in a racist behavior, sexist behavior, etc., etc. There's a very detailed policy that's out there. But in general, if you're being nice to someone and you're being respectful towards them and their choices, this policy, or you should not be in trouble. That is basically it. The larger thing that I want to flag is that in this com, there are some minors. Please make sure you are not engaging with minors on a one-to-one basis, i.e. that do not be alone in a room with a minor. Be with their teammate, have a member of equity there if you need to. If you're a minor yourself and want like personal feedback from judges, make sure there's someone with you, but do not for your own sake and for safeguarding purposes be alone like with someone who's not a minor. And other than that, there's an equity complaints form that you can submit complaints at that's online and it's already there. All clashes that were filed before 12 have been inputted and approved accordingly. If you've submitted clashes after 12, we will process them by the end of today and they will be applicable from tomorrow. Yeah, please feel free to reach out to us if you need anything. Thank you and have a good comp.
All right, thank you so much, equity. We will now release draws. The draws are public. You can access your URLs for them. We will try to connect it to the screen.
Dot Calico tag. Yeah, sure, you can do that. I will.
Hello. Excuse me. Sorry, just one thing. The campus is divided into 4 zones. There's zone A, B, C, and D. Zone A and B are on that side, and zone C and D are that side. D is right near the mess. So the runners will be allocated near these zones. You have been given maps on your WhatsApp group. You have been given maps on your folders, and there are maps pasted everywhere. So please go towards the general direction of the zones just to avoid confusion. There are no timekeepers, so make sure you time yourselves, and that's it. There are no timekeepers, so make sure you time yourselves, but make sure you go towards the general direction of the zone allocated to your room name. Otherwise, later you'll have confusion. That's all. And also on tabs, as you can see, there's CR1B, which indicates that it's zone B next in CR1, right? So go towards the general direction of your zones. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, stay here. Where are you going? Where are you going? The motion release is going to happen in 2 minutes. Don't go anywhere. Stay here. Aura farming, yeah.
Yeah, but they're released here, so don't go yet. Yeah. Guys, do not leave the hall yet until the motion is released. Okay? Do not head to the venue yet. Yeah, you can leave, but you won't know what the motion is. Guys, do not leave the hall. Please do not leave the hall yet until the motion is released. We are trying to coordinate with the other room. It should be within the next. I think we're. Not now, after this.
Hello everyone. Uh, hello, please 1 second. So like every room is divided into a zone. If your zone is next to your room, there is a zone. A wale people go to the this left side, thinking man ke left side mein. B wale people also go this side. C wale all the classrooms have like a C after. So C, all the C wale classrooms people are standing over here, and the D wale persons are standing over there. So it's situated according to your room wise. So please head towards there.
Motion release at 7:10 on the dot, right? By 7:10, yeah, because like 7:10, someone went to the washroom. Sharia.
Do you know how to hide the screen? Do you know how to freeze the screen? Yes.
I'm just gonna ask OC just to be sure. I don't know. Is there someone from OC here? Never mind. Hi. किसने करा ऑफर?
नहीं किया वो it's the it went shut. You need to disconnect it first.
मेल पे मोशन है, but we can't let anyone see it.
Hi guys. A quick announcement to all teams here. Please do not leave anywhere without informing your runners. Even if you're taking a washroom break, please tell your runners because they're literally waiting for you and we can't find you guys. Is that clear? Please. Yeah. Your room will be on. The people waiting, just stay there wherever you're going. It's right at the back. ऐसे.
हो गया ना डिस्कनेक्ट? या हो गया.
Very important announcement regarding the motion. If you want any clarification, you can only ask within the first 5 minutes. The 5 minutes will be part of the preparation time. It is not in addition to the 15 minutes.
Guys, one more again we are repeating, no digital note taking for speakers is allowed. Any major tournament that you would go to, ABP Worlds, anywhere in the world, nothing of it is allowed. Please make sure you stick to paper. Judges can use laptop. The only places in which speakers can use any digital device, and this is inclusive of phones, is in cases where you have got an explicit equity permission because of a medical reason. Other than that, nothing on laptop is allowed from speakers.
Where do we register? For what? I just reached right now, so I don't need to register or something.
Do you have it? Are you speaking?
Yeah, my teammates.
Then it's fine.
Motion release.
Hi everyone, calm down. You can keep your phones down. We will send this on the WhatsApp group. Just make sure you're not obstructing the view of anyone behind you. Cool. Round one for Nalsar IV. The theme